My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast.
On today's episode, we talk about pro GMing and marketing yourself. So if you are interested in potentially becoming a pro GM, this is the episode for you.
Welcome, everybody. Today I have Friday with me, professional game master and writer.
That's me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in tabletop role-playing games?
I have like the opposite experience as most people, so this is going to be weird, all right? So I was in the Marine Corps for 13 years, and then I first played, I did play text-based role-playing games, otherwise known as MUDs, multi-user dungeons, and those were basically just the precursor to MMOs back in the day. But I really enjoyed writing, so finding something where I could play them where I was and then also not necessarily need to meet up with the group regularly was kind of how I went from being a teenager and wanting to play these sorts of games all the time to being really unable to for the most part because of schedules within the military. And then as I was transitioning out of the military, I thought to myself, what do I want to do with my life? And I figured I should do stuff that I really enjoyed. And I wanted to also work for myself and not the man, TM, which has, I guess, turned out really great for me so far. Knock on wood. It's been going good. So that's essentially what happened. I tried out for a show. There was a post about like a D&D show, and I was like, that's cool. I did theater in high school. I can totally roleplay. And so I tried out for the show. I got on the show, and then I ended up doing a bunch of other stuff just to have something to do. Because when you're about to transition out of the military, most of the time they will just kind of put you in a place where you can kind of focus on not a lot. I was a staff sergeant, so I was just in charge of like all the broken kids, Marines, all the broken Marines who were injured or like couldn't go on deployment and stuff in my last 6 months. So I was just doing that, and it wasn't a lot of work, so I had all this additional time. And I was kind of turned into a producer for a D&D channel. And then I started to make D&D YouTube content, and then I started to GM. I started getting better at that, and then I ran my own shows the following year in 2021, and I organized those. I was the showrunner, producer. I was the GM for one of them. I made my friend GM a different one so that I could play for once. And we ended up running that on Kobold Press for 2 seasons, the Empire of the Ghouls playthrough on the Kobold Press channel. And fun fact, actually, the GM on that show, Kenzie, I recruited her into the Marine Corps. She was a sergeant by the time she left the Marine Corps. She flew Ospreys, the double rotor airplane.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she actually, at one point in our career, through just happenstance, gave my platoon a ride once during a training op, so that was cool. It was just random to see like Kenzie out there. I was there with my platoon, and she walked up, and I was like, I know who that is. I can tell even though she's got her helmet on. That's Kenzie. So that was kind of fun. But anyway, enough talking about my best friend. So yeah, and then I got into professional DMing because show running and like stuff like that, unless you're at the absolute peak and you're already working for an in-studio gig, does not pay that well. And that is understandable because it doesn't make a lot of money. But people are very willing to pay a professional game master to run their table for some consistency and a good time, because not everybody has a group of friends that are just readily available. So I started in January of 2022. It is currently October. And I went full-time in March, about the same time that I made roughly the same paycheck running games online as I did at whatever job that I took as an interim job when I got out of the Marine Corps. I quit that job. I should have waited longer. I should have had a reserve of funding, but I didn't because I'm extremely impulsive as a person. And I just went all in and I scaled up very quickly. And yeah, it was pretty difficult to get afloat, but I eventually did. And yeah, now I run 12 games a week roughly, sometimes less, sometimes more. I work currently as the director and co-lead of a supplement, and that also was like kind of a fever dream in that I took my homebrew campaign and just asked someone that I respected the work of if they wanted to work on it with me. In my case, it was Michaela Ebel, the co-writer of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. And I asked them, do you want to consult for me and work on this homebrew campaign that I was running? And this was back in 2021. And they said, yeah, we can do a couple of sessions. And I paid them to consult with me and like develop a little bit of the world that I was working on for my show. And then I ended up getting hired by them and the creators of One Night Strahd to work as their marketing person, which we reconnected several months later after that. Basically, as the person finding influencers for them and preparing what they needed to get the live play show done. And that bronze girl did it, Jasmine Bular. That's how I met, and then later ended up working for Jasmine for a little while, about 7 months as her content manager, to get her started on YouTube and everything, and help her with the season 2 launch of Shakar and everything like that. And yeah, I guess since then my latest project is that I'm working on bringing this homebrew campaign that I first developed as my first homebrew campaign into a supplement that we're going to sell on Kickstarter. But that's pretty much everything. I generally give a lot of advice as like my part-time job. That's kind of like the other thing that I do. I spend a lot of time doing that because people ask me the same questions, and eventually I said I should just put all this advice in one place. Like, and instead of me answering the same question 20 times a week, I just link them to questions I've already answered. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so you really just jumped right in at the beginning of the year, or not at the beginning of the year, but you started at the beginning of the year and then very quickly really dove in headfirst.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a whirlwind both in my personal life and professional life. So, yeah, very thankful of the opportunities and everything that's happened. It's kind of hard to believe, but here I am, so.
It's definitely one of those things where, I mean, getting into the TTRPG space, you've seen like, oh, I could pro GM potentially, right? And then, but like, would I make it much money from that? I don't know. But then to see people like you who are doing it full time, just it's like, oh, maybe that is an actual valid way that somebody could progress. So, what was it like, kind of those first couple months kind of before you dove in full force to it? How was it kind of going through that transition of just kind of dabbling in pro GMing to scaling up to becoming full time?
It was difficult because I still had a full-time job. So on Fridays and Saturdays, which I worked, I had Monday, Tuesday off, or Tuesday, Wednesday, one of those 2 days. Currently, I only have Monday off. But at the time when I had my day job, I didn't start work until 12, and then I worked until about 8 p.m. So on Fridays, I would run a game in the morning before I went to work, and then I would do my 8-hour shift, and then I would come home, and then I ran another game Friday night. And I did the same thing Saturdays as well. And that was how I got my first 4 games up, which, yeah, that's how I got my first 4. And once I started filling tables and then working through the process of improving my ad copy so that people would be attracted to my game, then that process happened faster every new time I posted a new game. So the best thing for scaling, I would say, and I've talked about this in Twitter threads before, you want to think about each game as like a glass or a pitcher, and you want to sort of hone you're doing into 2 or 3 different cups, right? Or 2 or 3 different pitchers. And once you fill a table or you fill a glass and it starts to overflow, then you get another pitcher or another glass of that type, of that color. So if you find that your Rime of the Frost Maiden games are filling, you open up another Rime of the Frost Maiden game because that's working for you, right? And then when you get a bunch of feedback from stars and wishes that express that you are good at X, Y, and Z, then you start to understand, why do people pay for me to be their GM? And for me, it was being good at telling horror stories. And that's what I started to double down on until I ended up getting to where I am now, where I run 6 Strahd games a week. And the other games that I run aren't nearly as important to my brand as Strahd is, because I run that game so well, it convinces people to play different types of games with me. So then I can pivot people from Strahd to anything in Exandria if I want to run that. Or I opened up Vampire the Masquerade games, which are more difficult to fill generally because there's a smaller pool of potential clients with those people who liked Strahd. They liked Gothic horror with me. So they're willing to try different stuff with me. And doubling down on what you are great at is very important for getting yourself over the part-time to full-time hump, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're focusing on what you're good at, and then you're using that as the gateway essentially to convert kind of existing players to potentially playing other games with you.
Correct, yeah. And you don't have to be great at everything. You just have to be really good at one thing. And if you're really good at one thing, then you're going to find a niche who love to play that game type, that campaign, that setting, that whatever with you. And they'll play less good things with you. Like, they'll try new systems with you. Like, even if you're new to it, because they trust you and they like playing with you. It's better to not think about a client's experience or a player's experience in like a vacuum in which they judge everything objectively. They really don't. They will over time just find that they like playing with you and they would like to come back and play more because of either your table culture, the way that you run games, so on and so forth. So if you can really tap into what makes your table unique, it's just a matter of time before you end up finding the right amount of clients to support you full time. And it has a lot to do with the methods that you might find in like the essay A Thousand True Fans, if you're familiar with that.
I haven't read it, but I am familiar with the idea behind it, which is essentially just getting 1,000 people that will buy everything that you do, right? Pretty much regardless.
Yeah, so if you think about a sales funnel, you imagine that a YouTube or any sort of social media presence is top of the funnel. That is someone who knows that you exist and who sometimes sees your material or whatever it is that you sell or you produce or you create, and they'll see it. That is the top of the funnel. When you get people further down the funnel, that means that they have bought something from you. When you get people at the bottom of the funnel, it means that they bought everything. And you don't need that many people at the bottom of the funnel. And that's what that concept is. So that doesn't necessarily have to be 1,000 people. That just has to be enough people. So for me, at my current pay scale, my prices are going up in December to reflect like my new pay scale. But a person pays $160 to $190 a month to play one game with me once a week, which sounds really high. Just me thinking about it, but people are doing it.
And if the people that you need, your clients, if they feel that that's worth it, which obviously they do because you're currently making that, right? Then that's kind of all that matters, right? I mean,
correct. My focus is not on what do people think about what my price is if they're not my client. I'm worried about my client satisfaction for the people who are paying that amount. And I think my reviews really reflect that and my client satisfaction. Because even if people find that they have something come up that they have to prioritize financially, I still get their message that says that, hey, I can't afford this for the time being. And then a lot of these clients end up coming back 2 or 3 months down the road. And I've already experienced a lot of that turnover or business coming back to me because they remember what it was like to play at my table. And it is true that this is more of like a bourgeois or we're like a boutique experience. That's what I'm catering to. I'm definitely not a casual service. This is not for somebody who thinks that they might enjoy the game. This is someone who is looking for a specialty experience. And that is what I try to provide people. Because instead of just having a game and wishing you could get a lot more out of it, I am providing people the best game of their life potentially. And that is what my business is built around for all of these different people.
right. So you're less concerned about quantity and more about quality, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. I only right now I'm at about so it would be more if I counted biweekly players as a full person, but I count them as half for my numbers just because that's how I track financials. But I have like 58 clients, and if you count my biweeklies, then it would be 68, around there. So I don't need to cater to a ton of people. And where I'm going with this, I don't need to get more clients in that. I would much prefer to, the further that I get along, I have less clients. I would like to run a table of 4 instead of 6, and I'll eventually get there. But that means that my price has to keep going up.
Right. There's a scalability thing there too, right? Because you only have so many hours in the day. You can only get so many people at a table and run so many games. So in order to scale, you have to just raise prices, basically.
Yep. So you're either scaling quantity or quality. And for a lot of people, they're very comfortable with 6 people at the table. Some of my games, I'd feel better if I only had 5 or less people. And that's kind of like where I prefer to be for most games, is 5 or 6 people. But I know that I can't, like, I have gotten up to 15, 16 games a week before, which is like, I'm in Barovia. Like, I am the land. I am the ancient, like at that point I wake up and it's just pure delusion. So I can't do that sustainably. I can do extra gigs, maybe a few times a month. Like I'm doing extra gigs this week, but I can't do extra gigs all the time. So there's a real limit on what everybody can do, and everybody has different limits. And I know for a lot of people who can't work a normal job, professional GMing is a great option, because one of my, I guess we could call each other friends, but I hate to be like overly familiar with someone that I don't personally know. But another pro GM in the community, James, is disabled, and they can only receive a certain amount of income a month. But it has changed their life to meet that cap, and they paid off all their debt, and they have way less problems in their life because they are financially free now in a way that they never have before in their life. And professional GMing has provided that to them. So I think it's a great option for a lot of people, especially those who have built up the skills to be a professional GM, like they've run a lot of games. Obviously, not everybody can be a professional GM for a number of reasons. I think a lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome with starting a business like this, for good reason, I think, because there are a lot of people who shouldn't be professional GMs, who are not good at it. And I think I lost, what was it, like 40 Twitter followers one morning when I said, if people are continuously leaving your game, you need to stop being a professional GM. Like, I said something to that effect on Twitter, and people take it really personally, but like, it's the truth of any business model. If you keep losing customers,
You don't have much of a business anymore.
correct. Like, if I wasn't going to tell them on Twitter, I'm sorry to say the free market was going to tell them. So like, I don't know. People are really sensitive about that, but like, it's the same thing as if you were making YouTube videos and you weren't getting any views. Like, you would probably examine that, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's outrageous to say that, but
I mean, it's either you take a hard look at why you're losing players and do something to address it, or you really don't have a business at that point, right? I mean, that's kind of you either figure out the problem and you solve it, or there's not really another problem then, because
yeah,
you don't have clients. So
exactly. And when you're taking on new clients, they're taking a chance on you, especially with this. This is a lot of time for someone to invest and pay you up front for. $20 to $45 for, or the average price I think is $18, $19 on Start Playing Games as of October 2022. But it's steadily risen from, like, I think $15 was the average price earlier this year. But yeah, that's a lot for someone to commit to that. So I don't mess around. Like, if someone's not good for the table, I tell them. I'm just like, I'm not the right GM for you. You and I both know what's going on. Like, this is not the table you're looking for. There's plenty of GMs who run different tables. I don't have to get every customer. I need the right customers. I need the beta customer that is looking for my games. I don't need everybody. And that's kind of the freedom of the professional GMing market as well, is that I have a cap at how many players that I have in my games. At maybe 60, 70 clients or whatever, I think I'm about at my cap. Like, I can't have that many regular clients because I start to forget people. And you know what I mean? Like, there's a very real consequence of like trying to serve everyone. So keeping my client list below 80 is very important to the quality of my work. And eventually I'm going to get it down to under 40, just at a higher price point, so that I only have to worry about 40 or less people. Or I'm going to do it part-time whenever I pick up a full-time job in games. So yeah, I'm not sure what got me on that topic, but for the most part, I think that people, if you are starting professional DMing, you do need to treat it professionally and then act professional, because people are paying you money for the service and you should take it seriously.
Can I ask, how much did you start charging when you initially started GMing?
I think I ran a few games at $20, and then I didn't run any games for like 4 or 5 months. And then when I picked it up again in December or January of this year, I was at 25, and then I quickly scaled.
And you didn't have issues getting people in at that price point when you were getting started?
No, not really. Most people's issues are that they don't understand how ad copy works. They don't know how to write advertisements or copywriting, as it's known, like as a skill trade. I have experience writing and also in sales, so it was not like super steep and inclined for me to learn basic copywriting. Once you learn basic copywriting and you figure out either how to legally and or ethically source images, then you shouldn't have an issue. SPG has a lot of great public domain or licensed images that you can use. And really, for the most part, you just need to zoom in on a particular part to make that thumbnail work for whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because most fantasy paintings have like a bazillion things going on. You really just need like one or you need like one or two things in focus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For most good thumbnails for an advertisement, and that's it. So once you figure out like the basics of that, then you shouldn't have a problem filling a game. When people are looking at advertisements on whether or not to buy anything, and this doesn't just apply to SPG advertisements in the marketplace there on that website, but they want to know what the product is, right? So when they're looking at a YouTube video or something on the Amazon marketplace or whatever, if you can quickly describe or explain what something is within 5 words or less in an image, then you can have someone decide very quickly if they want to buy it or not. And that's how you need to think about it. So if I'm looking at a title and a thumbnail for a game, and I'm deciding in this time slot if I want to play that game, if that title doesn't look relevant to me and that thumbnail does not look interesting, then I'm not going to click on it, and I'm not going to find out more about the game. And it's as simple as that.
And it's quick too, right? I mean, we will scroll on social media or YouTube or whatever, and you have to grab attention pretty quick, or
Yeah,
you're just gonna get passed up.
exactly. The metric for impressions are a second or less, and that's half of the thumbnail on YouTube. And so you need to only put 2 or 3 things in focus, because otherwise it's too busy for the eye to want to stop scrolling and look at it. But if you put something in focus that evokes a story or makes someone curious, or they look at it and it's like, oh, that's cool, then you're on the right track to having a good thumbnail, as long as it works with your title. And these titles should be working in conjunction with whatever the thumbnail is doing. So you can't have two unrelated things, essentially. They have to work in concert. So normally people, I recommend to them at least, that they find a good thumbnail that represents their game well, and then they write the title based on that to support it. And then everything else, yeah, and then everything else after that is just like a short description of like what the game is once they click on it, in case they want to know like this is level what to what in this system, and this is the type of game you can expect. All that stuff is way less important. Once you get the initial click, like normally they are about to buy. You just need to not mess up the sale at that point with what the product is, and make sure that you're clearly explaining what the product is in like the bigger description. But like the title and the thumbnail are number one after time slot. Time slot's important, but really there's only so much you can do about that. You can run games when you can run games. So
Yeah, that's not an unlimited resource, unfortunately.
Mhm.
There's a lot of good information. That's very like technical information to help with becoming a pro GM. Do you have any other advice if somebody's looking to get into pro GMing?
Yeah, I post a lot of it on my Twitter, which isn't the easiest resource to search. But if you get a browser app called Twemex, Twemex, and you click on my profile, it's going to show you all my top threads. And then you can just like scroll through that, and then you'll see like all my most popular thread advice. But I put all of that as well into my newsletter, which is also linked on my Twitter profile. So if people are looking for regular stuff in their inbox and they don't have to go anywhere for it, just sign up for the newsletter. And then eventually I'm going to ask you to buy my TTRPG supplement.
Speaking of which, when does that Kickstarter go live?
We
So
are
not a date
looking
yet.
we're looking at March or April. We haven't she hasn't signed the contract yet, but we're working with someone that we're very excited to work with for the Kickstarter. So basically anything I tell you right now, if it's ever countermanded or like we decide something else because that's what she thinks is a good idea, we're going to do it. She has worked on over 1,000 successful Kickstarters. I have nothing relevant to tell her. So she's going to tell me what we're doing, but tentatively March to April, somewhere in there, at least after February. My major concern is making sure that me as the primary investor, because I'm paying for all the contributors and all of the art that will be used for the Kickstarter advertisement itself, is already paid for. So we will have near 100% of the writing done, unless there is stretch goals that we unlock for additional content. That will all be done and paid for. And then any of the art that has been done will be paid for. And then the rest of the art is going to be paid for and started once we fund, because I don't want to launch a crowdfunding event with a bunch of people having done a bunch of labor that they haven't been compensated for yet.
Right.
So we're holding off on like 80% of the art for that, because that would be an additional 30,000, which we can launch the Kickstarter without all the art. We
Right.
can just do most of the art, or some of the art, I mean.
And how big of a supplement is this?
Right now we are estimating about 220 pages. We might expand it further with stretch goals, but right now it's about 220 pages of content.
And you said it was for your homebrew setting?
Yep. It is more or less, it's a little bit of a setting, but more it is focused on the undead organization called the Vineyard. And that essentially is a criminal organization that uses necromancy to dominate whatever city you want to put them in. So it is setting agnostic, and it is more focused on producing villains, plot hooks, encounters, and things like new mechanics to introduce to your table and liven it up, more or less. A lot of the time, I find that campaigns don't have compelling villains. We have created compelling villains, and they are all wrapped up within the same theme. So you don't have like a mishmash of different stuff from the monster manual that you're trying to tether together. We have a fully working organization with its own history and its own plot hooks and very engaging NPC villains that you can interact with. You can join the Vineyard if you want and become the villain. We have mechanics for that, so on and so forth.
Joining the bad guys is like the best part of D&D.
Yeah, you could if you wanted to.
You don't fight the mafia, you become the mafia.
Yeah, that starts with signing a contract. And when you sign a contract, then you're indebted to the Vineyard. And they function like a corporation in a lot of ways. I was actually discussing some of the concepts with Legal Kimchi, who's a D&D YouTuber that you may know. He is one of the contributors on that project, and we're having him develop the contracts, of course, because he's an actual real-life attorney. And a lot of the stuff that I was coming up with when I was talking to him last year and discussing a lot of these, it would be really evil if, he would just say, that's actually how this company works in modern America. And I was like, oh, great. And it was like all of that. It was just over and over again. It's like basically the way that the Vineyard monopolizes the diamond market is very similar to how De Beers works in real life. So, but that's funny. But yeah.
Gotta get those real life parallels in there.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. I like the idea of it being a system, or not system, setting agnostic, so you could drop it in wherever you're currently playing.
Yeah, and the locations and stuff are meant to just be plug and play in the same way. We have the different districts, like we have locations from a place called Rock Below, which is beneath the city where the Vineyard kind of came up from the guts of an abyssal type place that essentially is the remnants of the corpse of a ruby serpent, but it's got a lot of mechanics associated with it. We wanted to explore mechanics that were environmental in hazard. And I've been working with Chelsea Steverson on this, and you may know her as Little Red Dot. She's the Kobold Press. I can't remember her title right at this moment. I'm going to look at it on Twitter 1 second. because she just got promoted, and I think it's important to say that. She's the content production manager for Cobalt Press, so she does all the shows and everything like that for them. And then she's also on Pod by Night, if you're familiar with that vampire podcast. She's a producer and a performer on that. But I've been working on that with her because she is a very accomplished storyteller for both Coriolis and Alien. And those systems have a sort of very creeping horror base, like the darkness is going to consume you. And we wanted to include that both in the book and like allow people to put that into their game in D&D in some way. So we've created that. It is essentially a darkness, but we call it the rot, in which it consumes people and it changes them, not always for the better. This can be weaponized in certain ways, and you can work with one of the vineyard NPCs who can manifest these into magical weapons and use them that way. You can expunge the rot from yourself in order to gain temporary benefits or powers once your body has absorbed it. But then when you do that, you're giving the game master at the table additional tools for the rot to have additional effects, similar to the Coriolis system, in which the darkness will produce more encounters or bad effects or creepy stuff.
It almost sounds kind of mechanically how, like, if you decide to play a warlock, you have some kind of baked-in narrative leverage that the game master can use to get you to do things or to provide information or things like that.
Absolutely. And narratively, the vineyard is the devil you know in your campaign when you place the supplement into your game. This can happen at the beginning of the campaign. We recommend if you introduce it either way, though, even if it's in progress, you go over safety tools and you do cover the content warnings that are associated with our product, because it is not a PG-13 product. There are very mature themes with it that we are trying our best to run through is the proper process with sensitivity readers and then content warnings and everything like that. So this is not the product for every table, for sure. But narratively, the vineyard is the devil you know, in that the way that they have positioned themselves is they have a monopoly on necromancy. And the way that that works is they control the gems, which is derived from their control of the mining operations beneath the city. And because they have a monopoly on the gems, they can control the necromancy, which means that they can track the diamonds, like De Beers, with little stamps, magical stamps or laser etchings, right? And they can see whether or not people are using necromancy illegally. And they've developed that process in order to make the deal with the city government. We will control the necromancy for you because you're having all of these necromantic problems, these ghoulish invasions up to the surface, which were, in a way, false flag operations developed by the Vineyard, where they overran certain areas and then they controlled it to act as though they were helping. And that's the sort of organization that the Vineyard is.
That's really cool. Very deep and very thoughtful on how a lot of that stuff would work. I'm really interested. I would like to read that, the writing in that. It sounds like it'd have a lot of inspiration.
I have a preview document I can send you. And then at the end of the month for Halloween, I think next week, it'll be by the time you release this podcast perhaps, but we are releasing one of the NPCs for sample. And that'll be the Siren, who is a performer, songstress, who used to be really beautiful and used to fill out packed theaters and things like that. And she essentially had herself mutilated viciously in a fire that she caused through interpersonal drama, more or less, because she was a bit of a diva. And so she got horrifically burned. She made a deal with Ashlyn Ravenna, the head of the Vineyard organization, to retain her former beauty. And because she made that deal, she signed the contract with the Vineyard. She became a banshee, and she now reaps souls or debts, monetary debts that have become contractual obligations of those who owe the Vineyard money and have not paid. So if you owe the Vineyard money, there's a lot of different ways that the Vineyard can collect. One of those ways is by inviting you to a private show that you don't know is going to be the death of you. And the Siren will kill you at that show. Your body will be reanimated, and then you will be put to work.
enslaved in undeath.
More or less, and that is 100% one of the content warnings, because we definitely want to be very mindful of people's comfortability with indentured servitude. And it's, in this case, we want to be very careful that we are not having people born into slavery through the mechanics of what we're putting in the supplement. It is all indentured servitude. So people who previously chose to sign a contract with the vineyard, they can become essentially indentured servants until they have paid their debt. Whatever is determined by the organization would be the cost of what they owed them.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah, and it's good to be conscious of that. That can be a tricky line to follow, and it sounds like you're really trying to handle it the right way, which is great.
Yeah, we have a very storied and like responsible, and I guess we have a diverse, experienced team of writers. We have people that have written on Critical Role products, Hit Point Press products, Kobold Press products. We have my narrative designer is the co-writer of Icewind Dale, Remnant Frostmaiden. We have Candlekeep Mysteries. We have Flea Mortals and Arcadia products, and Uncaged Goddesses. Like, we have all of these star-studded writers, and I think the least that we could do as well is make sure that while we don't want to shy away from the mature material, we want to make sure that we provide GMs with the tools available to understand, like, here's how you try to safely run this if you want to run this theme. And we're not going to tell you how to run it at your table, but we're going to put all the content warnings on it and show you, like, this is potentially problematic for these reasons.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I think we're getting to a point where, trying to think of how to say it, is that there is a lot of sensitive topics, and it can be hard to know sometimes how to run those or how to avoid those things. So just having those warnings, and that having the information is better than not having it, which is vastly what we have now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't personally, like, while we're in the lab creating this product, like, I'm not going to be able to tell what's good for everybody's table either. So, and the nature of this supplement is that you can use as much or as little as you'd like. So if you find one piece in here that you like, we want it to be the best piece that you could find for your game. And that's kind of the attitude that we take. We want every time you open up the book, any 2 pages or any section, I want you to be able to take that and put it into your game and have it work how you'd like it to work.
So back on some of your professional GMing stuff, how do you prep for your sessions?
How do I prep? Okay, well, it depends on what I'm running. So for a vampire game, I use mostly reactionary style plotting. And that means that I understand what might happen. I will kick it off with an event that occurs, or something that happens that involves the party that they might need to react to from there. And then from there, it's all improv. And then it's things that I've developed that are static, like not necessarily static the whole time, but like NPCs, locations, things like that. So I mostly prep the stuff that I can't improv well on the spot. And that's for my vampire games. For D&D, very similar, except sometimes I do need to prep combat encounters. I have been known to drop a monster into a battle, like every D&D person, 5 seconds before a combat encounter begins. And I fall back on the advice of Brennan Lee Mulligan when he says he wasn't sitting on a golden throne when he developed something during GM prep. What he developed when he was in his boxer shorts eating a bunch of Cheetos on the couch is just as valid as what he comes up with at the table. So I think for the most part when I prep, I am just filling the holes of the things that I have over time learned that I cannot improv very well. And I can try to get better at improving that, or I can focus on my strengths, and I choose to focus on my strengths. So for me, that is making sure I understand where the story is going, pacing wise, what major things I want to happen in the plot that are non-negotiable and going to happen regardless of what the party does. Not to say that I railroad them. I don't. But like, you know what Curse of Strahd is. So you know at some point X villain is going to show up and say X thing. Those are things you can plan for to fill up space in like dead air, or it's just prepared encounters. So I guess that's my answer. just a lot of encounters, whether they be social or combat or puzzle.
I think that's some good advice, actually, and it's kind of generic enough to work for anybody, right? Because what you're good at improving might not be the same thing as somebody else, but just finding that balance of, oh, I'm decent at improvising these pieces, but these other things not so much, so I'm going to work on those.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll learn that more over time. And when you are new, you will just prepare everything. And I think it's important to run a campaign like Lost Mine of Phandelver once at least, so that you understand like what is a baseline of what it looks like to prepare. I see a lot of new DMs like say, I want to run a homebrew campaign immediately. That's cool, but like it's going to be tough because you just won't know where to start. Whereas if you run a pre-made campaign as your first and you make it a short one like Lost Mine of Phandelver, where it's only like 2.5 or 3 months, that's going to teach you a lot about what you're good at and then where you want to improve and what style of game you want to run. So I always recommend like not necessarily a one shot, but somewhere 3 or more sessions so that you really understand like what are you good at and where do you need to flex and where are you better spending your time during prep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I looked at your profile on Start Playing, and it looked like you do like battle maps and music and stuff. Do you want to talk about some of the resources that you use for those?
Yeah, so I run my games through Foundry VTT. Sometimes I use Roll20 depending on what it is, but most of my games are run through Foundry VTT. And I use for Curse of Strahd Benio's battle maps, and he has a Patreon, and I cannot tell you how amazing that stuff is. It is Unreal Engine 3D maps of all of Barovia, and he's still developing a lot of the little places, but all the major places are covered, including Castle Ravenloft. And you have not only Theater of the Mind maps, which are fully animated and have ambience along with them, but you have the battle maps. And for instance, Theater of the Mind maps, like outside Castle Ravenloft, where it's thunderstormy and, the rain's coming down or whatever, and then the lightning's crackling. Benios did an amazing job with that. So that is what I use for my Strahd games, is I use Benios battle maps. I think there's a lot of other resources, but I think that's the number one battle map. If you can get that to work on your system, that's where you want to go, in my opinion. I do subscribe to a lot of different patrons. Otherwise, for my other games, all of my Exandria games are with 2D maps and drawn maps. I love drawn maps. My love for Benios's battle maps is like my only foray into 3D. 2D maps, they're just more plentiful and easier to find what you need, especially if you're on a time crunch for prep. So I subscribe to Gian Pico. I'm actually just going to pull this up because I think those people deserve, at least for me to remember who they are. 1 second. Dun, dun. James RPG Art on Patreon also does amazing Theater of the Mind maps. I use Theater of the Mind maps more and more as I get more into roleplay as the forefront or the main pillar of my games. A lot of the time, I will have a Theater of the Mind map by James or Benios open, and me and my players will roleplay for 2-3 hours, just talking to each other or saying what our characters are doing. I love Theater of the Mind maps. So those are amazing, especially if you as a GM want more out of your players and to get them into that mindset of where characters weren't talking and get them out of the mindset of I move my token over here and I hit the goblin. I think Theater of the Mind maps are amazing for that. And especially because RPG or James RPG Art provides a lot of those maps that are generic enough for you to use them in almost any game. And then I also subscribe to like Moonlight maps. They have great bundles with like short encounters and things like that, and Neutral Party. And then I use Molinet to like import most everything into Foundry. So I'm a patron of Molinet as well. And that just saves me a lot of prep time. And when you're a professional GM, like saving yourself even like 5 to 10 minutes is a huge deal. So yeah, that's what I do.
So I haven't really heard of the Theater of the Mind maps, but it looks like, just from my little search here, it's almost just like animated, kind of like backgroundy type.
Yeah, you just put it on the screen and then, there's like a field or a city background, and maybe you've got an ambience track of, you know, the tavern noise or whatever, and you've got like the tavern Theater of the Mind splash map up, and then you get players to role playing, them talking about their latest quest or whatever, and then you can just easily transition between NPCs that way. There's not pressure on you as the DM to like throw tokens everywhere all the time in your virtual tabletop. You can be more fluid when you're storytelling. And I think that's a big benefit of Theater of the Mind maps. I generally only pull up battle maps now for 4 encounters, just like you wouldn't in a physical game where like you don't have a lot to work with and you're just waiting for the encounter to happen and then you'll build the map afterward or you'll draw it on the piece of paper, old school.
Yeah.
So I think that shifting my style back to that, where we're focused more on Theater of the Mind maps and we're using that as a tool to enhance the interaction between my players and me, is very beneficial. And I think it's superior than to having like a battle map up at all times, because a battle map up at all times changes the mindset of the player.
Right. I've played in games where we've had like a background piece or something popped up just during some of those scenes, and it definitely helps you get kind of in the right frame of mind. And it's also better than just like looking at either, like you said, either battle map or like, everybody's just faces on a Zoom call, right? Where there's not really anything to look at.
I was just going to say, it definitely works better for Vampire because there's like no reason to use tokens in Vampire because it's, but I just use my Chronicle is set in Seattle. So I just have a bunch of pictures of Seattle and I just put them up, and then I focus more on ambience, soundtrack, and storytelling for that. And then we're on camera as well with my players. So it's more about getting the feel. And then they have their character sheets on Foundry, but yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been a great conversation. We're about getting to time here. So would you like to go ahead and plug yourself on your social media?
Yeah, if you're looking for GM advice, or you're looking for the supplement I was talking about, you can find that on my Twitter. It's SFridayTV. And yeah, I'm usually on there. I post an educational thread once or twice a week, normally about pro GMing. So if you follow me, you'll probably see one at some point.
And I believe that is how I found you. So it works.
Yeah, they get spread pretty far and wide. I don't know. I think I hesitate to like, I don't know. It feels weird, but like when I went to Gen Con, people started recognizing me as Friday from Twitter. So it's just like, okay, well, this is a thing now because it's how people know me is Twitter. So I'll just lean into it, whatever.
Awesome. Well, I had a great time chatting with you today. A lot of good information here. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, and take care.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Masters Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.